Jake Morgan lived a quiet life on the edge of the human colony world called Helios 9. He fixed broken machines, traded scrap parts, and lived alone in a small dusty workshop built beside the junkyard. He didn't have many friends, and he didn't talk much, but he had one habit: he liked to buy strange things from the market. Old machines, broken tech, and once, even a robotic cat that never worked right. One cloudy afternoon, Jake walked through the market stalls, hands in his pockets. The wind blew sand into his face, and most people were already packing up. But one stall remained, run by a short-hooded trader with glowing blue eyes. On the table sat a single silver box, shaped like a cube with vents and blinking lights. A tag on the box read, "Smart Pet. V7 to 90% OFF final sale." Jake tilted his head. "What kind of smart pet is this?" he asked. The trader just smiled and said, "Rare unit, very intelligent, responds to care, very loyal. No one else buying?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. The trader shrugged. People too scared of what they don't understand. Jake didn't care for rumors. He gave the man a few credits, picked up the box, and walked away. The box was heavy, warmer than it should be, and when Jake carried it home, he felt something shift inside, like something breathing. In his workshop, Jake placed the box on the floor. He knelt beside it, scanning it with an old too low signals, number labels beyond the tag. He pressed the unlock button, and with a hiss, the top opened slowly. Steam rose from the opening, lights blinked off, and then Jake's heart nearly stopped. Inside the box was not a pet, not a robot. It was a girl, small and fragile, with glowing purple skin, silver hair, and strange spiral markings on her face and arms. She was curled up tightly like an animal, wearing a thin cloth and a metallic collar on her neck. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was slow, like she was drugged or asleep. Jake backed away in shock. "What the hell? This isn't a smart pet." The girl stirred slowly, her glowing eyes opening halfway. She looked at Jake but didn't move, didn't speak. She blinked, then lowered her gaze, as if she was expecting pain. Jake felt a strange anger rising inside him, not at her, but at whoever did this. He checked the collar, and his eyes narrowed. A message was engraved: "Zentha Corp property, do not remove subject defective." Defective? Jake whispered, "Is she some kind of experiment?" She didn't respond, but her fingers trembled, and Jake saw small scars on her wrists and legs. She had been treated like a thing, locked inside a box and sold like a toy. Jake sat down, unsure what to do. He could call the colony security, report her, or keep her safe, but helping her could mean trouble. Zentha Corp was powerful, and they didn't like questions. Jake stood up, went to the closet, and brought back a blanket. He gently covered her, and to his surprise, she didn't flinch. She looked up at him again, her eyes filled with silent confusion. Jake gave her water, and she drank slowly, carefully, like she hadn't had any in days. She still didn't speak, but when Jake offered his hand, she reached out and touched it gently, her fingers cold but soft. It wasn't fear in her eyes now, it was hope, weak, small hope. But it was there. That night Jake didn't sleep much. He sat nearby, watching her as she rested on the couch wrapped in the blanket. He tried searching her collar's code through his console, but nothing came up. It was encrypted, illegal, hidden from public records. Whatever this girl was, Zentha Corp didn't want her found, and yet they sold her as a smart pet, hoping no one would notice the truth in the middle of the night. She woke up and stared at Jake. He looked at her, unsure of what to say. She pointed to herself, then pointed to him and whispered one word: "Safe?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're safe here, for a moment." Her lips trembled like she might cry, but she just closed her eyes again and drifted back to sleep. Jake sat still for a long time. He didn't know what kind of creature she was, what secrets she carried, or what dangers were coming. But he knew one thing clearly: this girl wasn't a machine. She wasn't a pet. She was alive, and someone needed to care for her. He would be that someone, even if it cost him everything. Asterisk morning light crept through the cracks in Jake's workshop windows. Dust floated in the air, silent and golden. The alien girl, still wrapped in the blanket, sat quietly in the corner, her knees tucked to her chest. She looked around like she was trying to understand everything, the shelves of tools, the broken machines, the blinking lights. Her eyes were wide, but calm now, not afraid like last night. Jake moved slowly. Holding a mug of warm water, he sat a few feet away and placed the mug on the floor, sliding it toward her gently. The girl tilted her head, then reached out with both hands. Holding the mug carefully, she drank in small sips, and Jake noticed her fingers were steady today. No more shaking. He didn't speak, and neither did she. But somehow, there was communication, silent, simple, clear. Jake pointed to himself and said, "Jake." Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows, waiting. She blinked once, looked down, and touched her chest, but no words came. Instead, she looked at him and copied, Jake." It wasn't perfect, but it made him smile. "Good," he nodded. "And you?" She tried again. Nova?" he asked. She paused, then gave a small nod. Jake smiled again. "Okay, Nova it is." The name seemed to comfort her. For the first time, she relaxed a little, her shoulders not so tense. Jake gently turned off his loud workshop machines, keeping the room quiet for her. Nova seemed sensitive to noise. Every small click made her flinch. It wasn't just fear, it was conditioning. She had been trained or tortured to expect pain from sounds. Jake spent the day doing basic repairs in the corner. Watching Nova from the side, she stayed close but never touched anything unless he did. When he picked up a tool, she would watch carefully, eyes tracking every movement. Then, slowly she began to mimic. He lifted a wrench, she lifted a pipe. He tapped a screen, she tapped the edge of the couch. It wasn't just mimicry, she was learning. Jake found an old tablet and pulled up images of food, tools, and places. He showed them to Nova, pointing and saying the names out loud. She didn't speak much, but she listened, repeated, and understood. Faster than he expected, in just a few hours, she could point to water, door, warm, and even hurt. When she said, hurt, her hand touched her collar, and her face turned sad again. Jake knew the collar was still dangerous. It hadn't shocked her again, but the red light on its side was blinking slowly. Some kind of tracker, maybe, or a warning system. He didn't dare remove it yet. He needed to find a safe way to deactivate it first. That evening, Jake gave Nova a small cup of soup. She held it with both hands like it was the most valuable thing in the universe. She ate slowly, carefully, looking up at him every few bites, like she expected someone to snatch it away. Jake just nodded and said, "It's yours." Later, as the sun set behind the hills of rusted junk outside, Nova picked up a stick of chalk from the floor. She walked to the wall near the heater and, without speaking, began to draw. Jake watched in silence as shapes and symbols appeared, circles, stars, arrows, and something that looked like a broken ship. Nova stepped back and looked at Jake, her face serious now. She pointed at the drawing, then pointed at herself. Jake stood slowly, studying the shapes. The ship had looked like an alien vessel he had once seen crash land near the border zone of the colony. A mysterious wreck no one could access, surrounded by scanners and fences. He never thought much of it. Until now. "That's where you're from?" Jake asked. Nova nodded, her fingers trembling as she pointed again. Then she made a sharp motion across her neck, cut off. Jake understood. She had escaped or been taken from that ship, and someone had tried to erase the evidence. She was not just a pet, not even a mistake. She was a secret. Jake took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Whoever created Nova, whoever wanted her locked in a box, would be looking for her. And now she was with him, a simple mechanic with no weapons, no guards, and no backup. But Nova didn't feel like a threat. She felt like a child, scared and confused, desperate to be understood. And Jake couldn't turn away from her, even if it meant danger, even if it meant losing everything. As night fell, Jake gave Nova a small blanket and an old music player. He played soft music, slow and calming. Nova listened with wide eyes like it was magic. She curled up near the heater again, her body still small and tired. Jake sat nearby, watching over her like a silent guardian. She didn't speak much, but she understood everything. And slowly, quietly, she was becoming part of his life, not as a pet, but as something far more human. The next few days passed quietly. Nova had begun walking around more, learning simple words and helping Jake with little tasks. She still didn't speak much, but she smiled sometimes, especially when Jake handed her food or showed her something new. She even laughed once, soft and surprised, when Jake dropped a tool on his foot and hopped around in pain. For Jake, that small laugh was worth more than a pile of credits. But peace never lasts long on Helios 9, especially when secrets are buried beneath junk and silence. It was late morning when the shop bell rang. Jake looked up from his desk, wiping grease from his hands. He wasn't expecting any customers. Most people didn't come out this far without a reason. The man who walked in wasn't from the colony. Tall, sharp features, pale skin with a faint green hue. His coat was long, dusty, and expensive. A scanner device sat clipped to his belt, blinking slowly. Jake felt Nova freeze behind the curtain that separated the workshop from the back room. The man looked around slowly, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Are you Jake Morgan?" he asked in a smooth voice. Jake nodded. "Yeah, that's me, repairs and salvage. You need something fixed?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, maybe not. I'm actually looking for a missing unit." Jake kept his face still. "This a bounty job?" The man chuckled. "Not exactly. More like a recovery request, high priority. Special merchandise escaped from transport. Probably lost somewhere in the outer zones. Dangerous tech, bio-coded, illegal to own." Jake crossed his arms. "I work with machines, not pets." "Sure," the man said, still smiling. "But these things tend to wander. Sometimes they end up in scrap shops like this." He walked around the room slowly, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Then he paused near the curtain. Jake stepped forward quickly, blocking the path without looking obvious. "Back room's just storage," he said. "Old hover engines and busted compressors, nothing interesting." The man tilted his head. "Mind if I take a look?" Jake shrugged, trying to stay calm. "Scanner's broken. Some parts inside might mess with your gear. Not safe." The man stared at him for a moment longer, then stepped back. "Fair enough," he said. "If you see anything strange, a girl, purple skin, silver hair, report it." Jake nodded slowly. "I will." Without another word, the man walked out. The moment the door closed, Jake locked it, pulled down the shades, and rushed to the back room. Nova was curled in the corner, trembling, eyes wide with fear. Jake knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "He's gone. You're safe." But Jake knew better. That man hadn't come by accident. He was tracking something, probably using the blinking device on his belt. If Nova still had the active collar, and she did, they could trace her. Time was running out. That night, Jake took apart 3 scanners, 2 jammers, and 1 alien communication chip. He worked until his hands were sore, building a makeshift signal scrambler. He wrapped it in a metal casing, tied it to Nova's collar, and activated it. The red light on her collar blinked twice, then turned green. If he was right, it would block the signal. At least for now. The next day, Jake checked the outer security cams. They showed something that made his chest tighten. In the dark, past midnight, someone had come back. They had tried to break in, but the reinforced door held. Still, it meant one thing: they weren't giving up. Jake packed a small bag, loaded tools, food, and Nova's blanket into his old hover truck. He didn't tell her everything, but he said enough. "We're leaving, just for a while, place near the junk fields where no one goes." Nova looked at him, confused at first, but then nodded slowly. She understood one thing clearly: danger was coming. As they drove through the rusted hills, Jake looked over and saw Nova clutching the music player he had given her. She still didn't talk much, but her eyes said enough. She trusted him completely. Jake didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. She wasn't just another runaway experiment. She was becoming real to him, important, like family. They reached the edge of the old crash zone, Forbiddens, area where an alien ship had once fallen. Most called it cursed or haunted, but Jake saw it differently. It was quiet, empty, and forgotten. The perfect place to hide. Nova looked out the window and sat up straighter. Something about the place felt familiar to her, like distant memories waking up. Jake parked the truck under a broken metal arch, covered it with scrap sheets, and turned off the engine. For now, they were hidden, but he knew it wouldn't last. Forever, back in his workshop, the stranger watched a small screen. A weak signal had appeared, then vanished again. He smiled coldly and whispered, "Found you, asterisk." The old crash zone was quiet. Broken ship parts lay half buried in the dirt, metal bones of a forgotten battle. Nova sat on a flat rock near a bent metal wing, staring at it with wide eyes. Her fingers traced the ship's symbols, old and rusted, but still glowing faintly. Jake watched from a short distance, holding a scanner in one hand and a laser cutter in the other. He had one goal today: remove Nova's collar. The blinking red light was now green, thanks to the signal scrambler he had made. But the collar was still active, still dangerous, and as long as it remained on her neck, they were not truly free. Nova had drawn more symbols in the sand the night before. One of them matched a logo Jake had seen once: Zentha Corp's classified division. A division known only by rumors, whispers, and old data leaks. They didn't just build weapons or ships. They built things that were alive, bio-engineered hybrids for control, obedience, and profit. Nova was one of them, but she had escaped somehow, and that made her dangerous in their eyes. "Nova," Jake said softly, walking closer. "I need to try something." She turned toward him, her silver hair moving in the breeze. He showed her the laser cutter and pointed at the collar. Her eyes widened, and she took a small step back, fear flashing across her face. Jake raised both hands, calming her. "I'll be careful, I promise." Nova hesitated, then slowly walked over and sat down. She lifted her hair and exposed the collar, her hands trembling slightly. Jake knelt beside her, heart pounding. One wrong move, and the collar could trigger a shock or worse, inject something toxic. But he had studied its wiring for days, mapped the circuits, watched how it responded to light and movement. He aimed the cutter at the side panel, the least active section. Nova squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for pain. Jake activated the tool, cutting slowly, carefully. Sparks flew, metal hissed, and then click. The collar popped open and fell to the ground with a dull thud. Nova gasped and pulled back, covering her neck. For a second, they both waited, frozen. Nothing happened, no shock, no sound, no alert from the skies. Nova opened her eyes and touched her bare neck. She looked at Jake, her lips trembling. Then, in a quiet voice, she whispered, "Gone." Jake smiled. "Yeah, it's gone. You're free now." She looked down at the collar on the ground like it was a dead snake. Then she kicked it away hard, sending it flying into a pile of scrap. Jake laughed softly. "That's the spirit." But Nova wasn't done. She stood up and walked to a nearby wall of the broken ship. She pressed her hand on a glowing panel and, to Jake's shock, it lit up. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small alien cube inside. Nova took it and handed it to Jake. He turned it over in his hands. "What is this?" Nova pointed at it and said, "Memory." Later, inside the truck, Jake connected the cube to his portable reader. A hologram appeared, flickering blue, showing files, thousands of them, each one marked with strange codes, names and notes, experiments, subject logs, DNA types, and behavioral tests. And one file stood out: Subject V7 Nova. Jake opened it and read in silence. Created for emotional companionship, mental learning, and passive obedience. Hybrid species, part sentient. Part programmable. Issue: shows independent. Thought: disobedient behavior, empathy. Marked for disposal due to human-like emotional response. Jake clenched his fists. They wanted to erase her because she felt too much. Because she cared. They didn't see a life. They saw a product that didn't work the way they wanted. Nova sat beside him, watching the screen. She pointed to another file, showing a picture of a younger version of herself, eyes wide. Collar tight, sitting in a white room, she whispered. No more. Jake nodded. Never again, I promise. That night, Jake uploaded the files to a hidden channel used by human whistleblowers. He added a message. Proof of Xantha corpse. Living experiments spread this. It was risky, but he couldn't let it stay buried. Nova wasn't the only one. There could be others still trapped, still waiting for someone to care. As the stars appeared above the crash site, Jake sat on the roof of the truck, staring into the dark. Nova joined him quietly, holding a cup of warm water. She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. For the first time, there was no collar, no blinking light, no fear in her eyes, only peace. Even if it was just for one night, Jake looked at her and said, You're not property. Nova, not a product. She looked at him, smiled softly, and replied, I'm me. And with that, they both sat in silence. Two souls who found each other in the middle of nowhere, not by accident, but by something deeper. Something that couldn't be built in a lab or sold in a box. The files were out. Jake had uploaded them to 6 encrypted networks, bouncing through satellites and junk relays across the galaxy. He didn't know who would see them first, activists, media, or bounty hunters, but he knew this much. Xantha Corp would find out, and when they did, they would come for him and for Nova the next morning. The air was tense. Nova had stopped smiling, her eyes scanning the sky often. She had felt that danger was close. Jake didn't waste time. He packed the truck with more supplies, fuel cells, signal blockers, and backup drives. He had built a makeshift bed in the back for Nova, hidden beneath metal panels and sensor jammers, as they drove across the broken wastelands of Helios 9. Nova sat in the passenger seat, hugging the blanket tightly. Her silver hair was tied back now, her face still soft, but her eyes sharp, aware. Jake could see it clearly. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was ready to fight if she had to. The skies above turned gray, a dust storm brewing in the distance. Jake drove fast, avoiding main roads, using the scanner to detect drones. Stay low, stay hidden, he repeated under his breath. They had to reach the old rebel hideout deep in the salvage zone, a place even bounty hunters avoided. As they neared a rusted bridge, Nova suddenly leaned forward, eyes wide. Jake followed her gaze. 2 black transport crafts hovered near the horizon. Too high to hear, but low enough to scan, Jake cursed. They're sweeping the zone already. Nova looked at him and said just one word. Run. Jake slammed his foot on the pedal, and the old truck roared to life. They raced across the cracked desert, tires bouncing on broken metal plates and old bone-dry cables. Behind them, the crafts changed direction and moved in fast. Alarms on Jake's console blinked red. Locked onto us, he muttered, turning sharply. He drove into a canyon where signal strength dropped. Nova pointed left, showing a narrow tunnel between 2 walls. Jake swerved in without hesitation. The truck scraped both sides, sparks flying, but it fit. They emerged into an open valley of twisted wrecks and towering scrap mountains. Perfect cover. Nova grabbed the small control box Jake had given her earlier, the jammer. She activated it just in time, and one of the enemy drones above lost signal and spun wildly, crashing into the junk below. Jake cheered. Nice shot. Nova didn't smile. She was focused, serious. She pulled up a small glowing panel from her wrist, something that had appeared after her collar was removed. It showed maps, escape paths, old data left from her ship's memory cube. She pointed to a hidden bunker up north, far beyond the salvage zones. Jake nodded. Let's make that our new plan. They stayed hidden inside a rusted ship for a while, catching their breath. Nova bandaged Jake's arm where a shard had cut him. Her hands were gentle, careful, like she had done this before. Jake watched her, amazed. She was learning fast, adapting, surviving not as a machine, but as a person. Later, Jake set up a fireless heater, and they shared dry rations. Nova finally spoke after hours of silence. "They'll keep coming," Jake nodded. "I know, but I'm not giving you back." Nova looked down, then whispered, "Why?" Jake blinked, confused. "Because you're not a thing to return." Nova stared at him, her voice small. "No one ever said that to me before." That night, the stars were hidden behind thick clouds. Jake couldn't sleep, so he walked outside to check the sensors again. He stood on top of a metal slope and stared into the dark. Footsteps behind him. Soft Nova joined him, wearing a thermal coat too big for her. They stood together in silence, two shadows in a world that had forgotten them. Jake broke the silence. "Do you miss it? Your world?" Nova looked up at the sky. "I don't know. I never had a world." Jake felt a weight in his chest. She wasn't just created, she was denied a home from the beginning. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then let's build one together." She looked at him, eyes glimmering, and gave the smallest nod he had ever seen. But it meant everything. The next morning, they started moving again, using night routes, turning off electronics often. Nova guided them using instinct and old memory data. They avoided 2 more patrols and even tricked 1 drone using a heat decoy Jake built from spare wires and engine coils. They worked like a team now, silent, fast, focused. No longer just a runaway girl and a lonely mechanic. They were something stronger, and yet far above, in a glass tower on another world. A Zentha Corp director stared at a glowing screen. "Subject V7 located," he said coldly. "Send the Black Retrieval Unit." The woman beside him hesitated. "That's overkill, sir." He narrowed his eyes. She leaked the files, and the human helped. "Bring them back or burn everything down." Back on Helios 9, Jake and Nova crossed the final canyon leading toward the hidden bunker. They didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming. Not a storm of dust or wind, a storm of soldiers, fire, and choices that would change the galaxy forever. The bunker was hidden beneath layers of scrap. To any scanner or passing drone, it looked like a collapsed fuel depot, worthless and forgotten. But Nova remembered the shape of the hill, the outline of the old landing pad. She pointed to a cracked metal plate buried in rust. Jake moved quickly, brushing away dust and pulling at the edge. A hiss escaped as the ground shifted, revealing stairs that led deep into the earth. They stepped inside, their boots echoing on the metal floor. The air smelled old and dry, but the power still worked. Flickering lights blinked on one by one. As they walked deeper into the darkness, the bunker had once belonged to the rebels, maybe years ago. Now it belonged to them. Nova activated a control panel using her wrist ID, something Jake still didn't fully understand. It wasn't just a tracker, it was a living key, coded into her DNA. The systems responded to her instantly, unlocking files, maps, and communications Jake had never seen before. They found an old control room with cracked chairs and dusty screens. Nova wiped the dust and pulled up a live data feed. "Zentha Corp units incoming," she said quietly. "They sent the Black Retrieval Squad." Jake swallowed hard. "How many?" Nova tapped the screen. 6 transport ships, cloaked, moving fast. "They'll be here by night." Jake stepped back, breathing heavy. This was no longer about hiding, it was about surviving. "We can't outrun that," he said. Nova looked at him, her voice steady. "Then we fight." Jake had never been a fighter. He fixed machines, repaired broken things, and stayed out of trouble. But now, the trouble had come to him, and Nova, the girl he once thought was just a broken product, was standing tall like a soldier ready for battle. They spent the next hours turning the bunker into a fortress. Jake reactivated the turret systems, repaired the shield generators, and placed motion mines in the outer field. Nova uploaded her memory files into the old network. spreading proof of Xantha Corp's crimes through hidden channels. She wasn't just running anymore. She was exposing them. Every file, every experiment, every secret. They all went out, and someone, somewhere would see the truth. As the sun set, red and heavy in the sky, Jake and Nova stood at the bunker. Entrance. The wind howled across the wasteland, carrying the sound of engines. The first transport ship appeared above the ridge, black and silent, then another, and another. 6 in total, just as Nova predicted. They hovered above the bunker like vultures waiting to strike. Jake held a plasma rifle he hadn't used in years. His hands shook a little, but his eyes were steady. Nova stood beside him, calm, glowing faintly under the fading light. She had changed. She was no longer just scared, she was powerful. And she had chosen to stand with him. A voice echoed from the loudspeakers above. Cold and robotic, return the unit known as V7 Nova. Surrender now, and you may be spared. Nova didn't flinch. She stepped forward, lifted her wrist, and sent out a burst signal. It hit the nearest ship's sensors and scrambled there. Targeting system. The ship spun out of formation for a second before recovering. Jake grinned. That's our answer. The sky lit up. Drones rained down. Weapons fired. Turrets exploded to life. The battle began. Not with fear, but with fire. Nova moved like lightning, jumping between cover, launching coded virus bursts from old terminals. Jake provided backup, taking down drones with quick shots, guiding power to the defense grid. He had never felt more alive. The quiet man who once bought a smart pet was now defending the most important person in his life. But the enemy was strong. One by one, the outer mines failed, turrets overheated, and shields began to flicker. Jake got hit in the leg, falling hard, blood-staining. His pants. Nova rushed to him, shielding him with her own body. Her hands glowed, sending a pulse of energy into the enemy drone above it, exploded in midair. Jake looked up at her, groaning. They're not stopping. Nova looked down at him, her voice shaking but firm. Then I'll make them. She turned toward the bunker and activated a core system, something hidden deep in the files. A protocol marked Last Resort. Jake watched in horror as the ground began to hum. Nova, what are you doing? She looked at him one last time and said, ending this. The bunker's old engine, the same alien tech Nova came from, began pulling power from the planet's crust. A massive wave of MP light exploded upward. It shut down every Xantha Corp ship in the sky, frying systems, wiping their scans, disabling their weapons. They fell like stones, crashing into the wasteland in smoke and fire. Then silence. Nova collapsed beside Jake, her energy drained, body trembling. Jake crawled to her and held her tightly. You did it, he whispered. You stopped them. She nodded slowly, barely conscious. Jake looked around at the wreckage, the broken machines, and the girl in his arms. He had a choice to run once, but he chose to stand, and because of that, they were still here, together. The bunker was hidden beneath layers of scrap. To any scanner or passing drone, it looked like a collapsed fuel depot, worthless and forgotten. But Nova remembered the shape of the hill, the outline of the old landing pad. She pointed to a cracked metal plate buried in rust. Jake moved quickly, brushing away dust and pulling at the edge. A hiss escaped as the ground shifted, revealing stairs that led deep into the earth. They stepped inside, their boots echoing on the metal floor. The air smelled old and dry, but the power still worked. Flickering lights blinked on one by one. As they walked deeper into the darkness, the bunker had once belonged to the rebels, maybe years ago. Now it belonged to them. Nova activated a control panel using her wrist ID, something Jake still didn't fully understand. It wasn't just a tracker, it was a living key, coded into her DNA. The systems responded to her instantly, unlocking files, maps, and communications Jake had never seen before. They found an old control room with cracked chairs and dusty screens. Nova wiped the dust and pulled up a live data feed. Xantha Corp units incoming, she said quietly. They sent the black retrieval squad. Jake swallowed hard. How many? Nova tapped the screen. 6 transport ships, cloaked, moving fast. They'll be here by night. Jake stepped back, breathing heavy. This was no longer about hiding, it was about surviving. We can't outrun that, he said. Nova looked at him, her voice steady. Then we fight. Jake had never been a fighter. He fixed machines, repaired broken things, and stayed out of trouble. But now, the trouble had come to him, and Nova, the girl he once thought was just a broken product, was standing tall like a soldier ready for battle. They spent the next hours turning the bunker into a fortress. Jake reactivated the turret systems, repaired the shield generators, and placed motion mines in the outer field. Nova uploaded her memory files into the old network, spreading proof of Xantha Corp's crimes through hidden channels. She wasn't just running anymore, she was exposing them. Every file, every experiment, every secret. They all went out, and someone, somewhere would see the truth. As the sun set, red and heavy in the sky, Jake and Nova stood at the bunker entrance. The wind howled across the wasteland, carrying the sound of engines. The first transport ship appeared above the ridge, black and silent. Then another, and another. 6 in total, just as Nova predicted. They hovered above the bunker, like vultures waiting to strike. Jake held a plasma rifle he hadn't used in years. His hands shook a little, but his eyes were steady. Nova stood beside him, calm, glowing faintly under the fading light. She had changed. She was no longer just scared, she was powerful. And she had chosen to stand with him. A voice echoed from the loudspeakers above. Cold and robotic. Return the unit known as V7 Nova. Surrender now, and you may be spared. Nova didn't flinch. She stepped forward, lifted her wrist, and sent out a burst signal. It hit the nearest ship's sensors and scrambled there. Targeting system. The ship spun out of formation for a second before recovering. Jake grinned. That's our answer. The sky lit up, drones rained down, weapons fired, turrets exploded to life. The battle began. Not with fear, but with fire. Nova moved like lightning, jumping between cover, launching coded virus bursts from old terminals. Jake provided backup, taking down drones with quick shots, guiding power to the defense grid. He had never felt more alive. The quiet man who once bought a smart pet was now defending the most important person in his life. But the enemy was strong. One by one, the outer mines failed, turrets overheated, and shields began to flicker. Jake got hit in the leg, falling hard, blood-staining his pants. Nova rushed to him, shielding him with her own body. Her hands glowed, sending a pulse of energy into the enemy drone above it. Exploded in midair. Jake looked up at her, groaning. They're not stopping. Nova looked down at him, her voice shaking but firm. Then I'll make them. She turned toward the bunker and activated a core system, something hidden deep in the files. A protocol marked Last Resort. Jake watched in horror as the ground began to hum. Nova, what are you doing? She looked at him one last time and said, ending this. The bunker's old engine, the same alien tech Nova came from, began pulling power from the planet's crust. A massive wave of EMP light exploded upward. It shut down every Xantha Corp ship in the sky, frying systems, wiping their scans, disabling their weapons. They fell like stones, crashing into the wasteland in smoke and fire. Then silence. Nova collapsed beside Jake, her energy drained, body trembling. Jake crawled to her and held her tightly. You did it, he whispered. You stopped them. She nodded slowly, barely conscious. Jake looked around at the wreckage, the broken machines, and the girl in his arms. He had a choice to run once, but he chose to stand, and because of that, they were still here together,